Hey everybody, welcome. I'm so excited today to be talking to Sylvia Montgomery Shaw. She is the author of The Flight of the Trogon, which is published by the Swedenborg Foundation. It is book 2 of the Mexican Eden Trilogy, but also it's a completely standalone book. So if you've never read book 1, you can get right into this and have a lot of fun. Sylvia, it's so great to see you here today.
Good to be here.
And I'm excited to talk about this book because I know you've put a lot of themes from Swedenborg's works into the plot, and I want to get to those, and I think that'll be interesting to our viewers. I'll get to those in a minute. But first of all, let's get a little context. It's a pretty big book. People will encounter that right away. But what you've done is you've got these little fun chapters that are easy to make their way through.
Right. Readers have told me that really makes it a pretty fast read, thanks to those
Okay.
short chapters. I'm sorry, it's a long book, but it's
Well, that's what you mentioned when we first started talking about it. You said we should mention that,
yeah.
so they know that. What's a trogon?
So it's a kind of a bird. It's a family of birds, and then a quetzal, it belongs to that family of trogons.
Okay.
So I was looking for a general term for this bird that is metaphorical. It's in that novel. It's important.
Very exciting. So all right, just for context, where is the story taking place and at what time?
Okay, so it's 1911 to 1913, Mexico. It's in Mexico City, but most of the action is in a small state called Morelos, which is just south of Mexico City. So it's during the revolution. We had a 10-year revolution in Mexico. It went from 1910 to 1920. And I'm just zeroing in on this particular aspect of the revolution. It was what I did for my doctoral dissertation. I really focus on Mexican historiography, and so I wanted to use all this material that I had, all this information, and put it in fiction.
Excellent. So something you know well, something you're familiar with, and you're going to
Right.
bring us in with you. Okay, so let's talk about some of these themes, spiritual themes that show up in the book. So first of all, the idea that life continues on after death. You said this is something that plays a role in the story.
And I put it right at the very beginning of the book. I'm going to read just the first couple of sentences,
Okay.
but it sets the tone of the book. It says, "My gravestone bears a simple inscription: Isabel Brent, 1890 to 1911. Now that's brevity, brutal brevitas. If you ever find yourself in the south central highlands of Mexico and happen upon a forgotten cemetery in a forgotten plantation, you can see it for yourself." And then I go on, and she talks about her past. So I'm making it clear right from the front. Okay, we're talking to somebody who has probably already passed. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
end of that first chapter, I write, "As for that tilting tombstone of mine, don't let it distress you. It is but one marker on a long journey. Besides, as a wise old Swede observed, what we call death, the angels call resurrection." So
Ah,
there's our theme.
that's great. So obviously, if we're encountering somebody still talking to us about their own tombstone, there
Right.
must be something beyond the death. And then we have our wise old Swede in there too.
Yeah. And we'll spend a lot of time where she's telling you about her natural life and her spiritual journey. So it's not
Hmm.
going to be so much about what happens to her in heaven, but it's more about how do we change in the course of life. We're all on a spiritual journey. What's hers like? What can she tell us?
And you said that there's another theme in the book that may be part of this journey, which is reconciling to the violent death of a loved one.
Yes, and here I think again it's a universality. So specifically, I'm talking about the Mexican Revolution. People don't realize that close to 1 million people died in that Mexican Revolution. It was
Wow.
major in Mexico. But all around us now, people die violently in car accidents, in warfare, and we, the survivors, have a tough time coming to terms with that. But I wanted to show, well, what about the person who has passed? They have a different perspective. And I really wanted to bring that to the fore.
Hmm.
They're not in a state of sorrow the way we are.
That, and it's something you don't really think about when you're trying to make sense of something like that. Is it, where are they now? How are they experiencing it? So
Yeah,
that could be very comforting.
I would hope so, because I think that's the hardest part about death, right? That we don't see the person, we don't get to talk to the person who passed. But if that person could tell us what's going on, I think we would be greatly comforted. Um, so in this case, I'm describing a time of warfare, people being killed, but one can come to terms with it. Well, it depends on your outlook.
Okay, so during a journey like that, I understand the book also touches on the theme of, you could call, shifting states of enlightenment, which I guess is that spiritual journey is affected. But how does that show up in the novel?
Where there are moments where the protagonist, for example, the protagonist is an American girl, age 21. She's in solitary confinement, and there are times when she senses the transcendent. You know, she has those moments of enlightenment, and then other times she's angry, she's frustrated, she's incarcerated, she's cut off from the world. And I think that's very true of enlightenment. I was reading from just different philosophers and different theologians who talk about how maybe it's like a spiral, and you have moments of enlightenment and then you backslide a little, and then you have more moments of enlightenment and you go a little higher, and then life intervenes and you backslide a little, but always this ascendancy if you're on a spiritual journey, if you're in the right direction.
That's very comforting to hear, because I certainly backslide. I think
Mm,
everybody
don't we?
who's watching this, everyone who picks up the book, will recognize that in themselves. I thought I was doing really great 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Am I worse now than I was then? But I think you've touched on something universal, which is it's just like the cycle of the seasons. It does come and go, ebb and flow.
Yeah, it definitely does. And there would be times in the novel where she's forgiving and other times where she's resentful and then catches herself. So there's the spiritual progression when you catch yourself and you redirect your energy in a better way.
Yeah, I think Swedenborg would probably describe it as sort of the tug of heaven on us versus the tug of hell on us, and both trying to kind of make their presence known.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like with the themes that you're mentioning here, you couldn't go through a story like this without grappling with the problem of evil, or why do these things? So you mentioned that Swedenborg's perspective on theodicy, or the problem of evil, makes an appearance in the book.
Very definitely. It's one of the key themes, because if you think of this young woman who is suddenly incarcerated and her whole world is falling apart, she's going to be asking, where is God? Why isn't he here stopping all this? Why doesn't he stop this war and all the killing, etc.? It's a very common issue for human beings to grapple with. So I have her. One of the things that inspired me was I wanted to respond to David Hume, the English philosopher, who famously said, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? And I thought Swedenborg has wonderful material for this, wonderful
Mm.
responses on the freedom that the Lord gives us. And evil it's almost inevitable, because there are people who will make bad choices. But if we're to have human freedom, if we're not to be puppets, then we have to take the good and the bad. And that's our struggle here on earth. We're making choices.
Yes, and having to deal with the consequences of the choices other people made
Yeah,
as well.
that's
I was
right.
just thinking about your protagonist in her own struggles, but then, as you mentioned, the struggles in the whole country around her, and a million bad choices leading to this.
And even her nemesis, the one who has incarcerated her, isolated her from everybody, this woman, the nemesis, has a tremendous impact on her children, who have to deal with the shame of it when they discover what's been going on. And
Mm.
I often think of, let's say, the really horrendous Nazis. they had children and grandchildren who have to live and cope with knowing what their parent or grandparent did that was horrendous. And it's hard for them. Now, I'm aware of, it's a struggle. Everything we do has consequences, not just
Yes,
to us.
that's right. Because if your grandfather or grandmother did terrible things, you didn't have a part in that. But here you are carrying the burden by association.
Yeah. Say that your last name is Mengele, and he's
Yeah.
grandpa. That's going to be hard.
Wow. Yeah. You don't. Those are people that you don't always think about in the
Mm,
big sweep of history.
yeah.
Okay. So you touched on this a little already, but I wonder if we could expand a little more. And you're doing a great job, by the way, of having a spoiler-free conversation here, where
Good.
we're getting into the themes without giving. I understand that's difficult to do, so you're doing excellent at that. But can we talk a little bit more about the theme that there is a natural side to life and a spiritual side to life, and that we're experiencing both of those at the same time. This was a key theme for Swedenborg, and it's in the novel as well.
Right. Well, Isabel, the protagonist, about half of the book, or more than half of the book, is pretty much her internal life, what's going on with her as she's in prison. And she comes to the realization that she's not alone. Even though she's in total isolation, she's in a white cell, there's nothing to stimulate the mind, but she prays a lot and she becomes aware that there are, she believes in spirits and in angels and really comes to sense that they're there with her. She's not alone in this ordeal that she's going through. Uh, on the flip side of that, her nemesis, the woman who has incarcerated her. And by the way, the reason this woman can incarcerate someone is there used to be lots of huge plantations in Mexico before the revolution. And these were like city states. They had their own telegraph office, their own jailhouse, hospital, schools. The workers lived within that compound. And then there'd be the owner who lived in a mansion. So this particular woman has her little city state, and she is out for revenge. She wants to get Isabel. Long story, but she wants to make this woman suffer, this young woman. So she incarcerates her, and no one's going to know that she's in a room in this plantation in the middle of nowhere, right, in southern Mexico. So that's the setting for this. And the nemesis is named Manuela. There's a point at which Isabel is near death, and she looks up at this woman, and she sees, just for a moment, some really nasty looking spirits who are with her. And she warns her, you're already in hell, and you don't realize it because of the way this woman thinks and the things she's been doing. Just that realization that we are in the spiritual world, not just in the natural world. And near death, she can sense this. She sees it just for a few moments. So that's one way of seeing that. But I wanted to really emphasize that we live in two worlds simultaneously, and we're not aware usually of the world of spirits or heaven until we die, right? That's when we usually, but we're there. And we're drawing to ourselves evil spirits, good spirits, depending on our choices day by day, moment by moment.
So an unseen but not unfelt
Right.
influence, and
Mm.
that one that you I guess all books that have ever been written unknowingly incorporate the spiritual world because it influences the minds of humans on Earth, and
Mm.
that influences the choices and drives the plot. But in this book, you're seeing a little behind the curtain of,
Yeah.
yeah, that this is why the good act like they do, and why those bent on to evil continue to dive further into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, so you mentioned that prayer. Prayer is an important theme in the book. It seems to be crucial for the protagonist.
It is. And it gave me the chance to explore prayer, to really think about it. What does prayer accomplish? And I wanted to indicate that prayer doesn't necessarily change the circumstances. So Isabel can pray all she likes and she's still a prisoner, but it
Right.
changes her inwardly. It helps her cope. Sometimes it enlightens her. Prayer has that that wonderful power to it. But it doesn't necessarily, change the physical reality. And that was important to me to get that idea across. Um, I grew up in the Eastern Orthodox Church. My dad was a priest. And so I grew up with the notion of the hesychasts. They were early church fathers, and 1,500 years ago, they were developing this prayer that's called the Jesus prayer. And it's a form of meditation, but it's a prayer, and you say it over and over and over. And so Isabel has access to this. She had been to Paris. She had been to the Russian Orthodox Cathedral of Paris, bought a little icon, saw the prayer that was on the back of the icon. And so now that she's desperate, she's cut off from people, she says this prayer, and she says the Lord's Prayer as well. But it becomes a form of deep meditation because it's calling on the name of the Lord.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I love that distinction. Yes, you can't pray your way out of the jail. Mm-hmm. You can't pray away the war. You can pray to change you. A miracle can happen inside of you, and so that's something that's always there for her, no matter what's going on.
And with all our problems, all our challenges in life, sure, pray to the Lord. It's a way of finding comfort, but also maybe enlightenment and ways to cope. We can't change a lot of things, but we can learn how to cope.
I understand that actually one of my favorite books of all time, Divine Providence by Emanuel Swedenborg, makes an appearance in this book. Okay, can we talk a little about that without giving too much away?
Oh, sure. So Isabel, when she's first sort of locked up in this plantation, she has two books. She has a Bible and she has Divine Providence. And her nemesis takes the Bible away from her, doesn't realize she has a second book. So now Isabel still has Divine Providence. She's locked up. She's not in total solitary yet. This happens in stages. So in this earlier stage of her incarceration in the plantation, she reads surreptitiously. She only has one book, Divine Providence. It's not to her taste. She wanted to read a good Gothic novel or something more juicy. But this is it. This is all she has. And as she reads it, she becomes more and more fascinated by it. And when she gets to the end of the book, she just starts again on page 1 because she has nothing else to do or to read. Now, eventually, she's going to be put into total solitary. And now she has these ideas that she picked up from reading Divine Providence that she can take with her. She can't take the book, but she has the ideas, and they really help her to get through about a year and a half of incarceration.
So she was sort of unwittingly thrown into a master's class in Swedenborg's Divine Providence.
Right. She had no interest in it initially, but desperation led her to it. And now she's in a different frame of mind. She's not quite the giddy young girl. She's confronting very serious things and thinking a lot about it. Why is there evil in the world? And so she's fascinated with Divine Providence.
And I think we're seeing some of that, the journey unfold you mentioned earlier, the shifting states, her own spiritual life, and how she's changing what she believes and what she cares about.
Right. And then in the book, I do branch out into what's happening in the rest of the country. Right. We've been in the prison with Isabel, but what about the rest of the country? What about the people that she loves? What's going on with them? What's going on with the bigger picture?
There's actually a complex tapestry you're weaving here with a lot of different characters. So, well, Isabel's the focal point, but she's certainly not the only one we encounter.
Correct. And this gave me the chance then to explore the way the war is affecting different people. So, for example, there's one character who's in prison for something that he didn't do, and he has guards that help him. He's a very wealthy young Mexican, and his family pays for protection, so he doesn't get beaten up more than it happens once. But after that, they give him some bodyguards. And I wanted to get inside the head of these bodyguards. Who are these men? So that follows through. I wanted to be respectful of the Catholic religion because Mexico is about 99% Catholic. I grew up, I grew up in Mexico. My family is Catholic. I'm not, but I understand a lot about the Catholic Church and the appeal. So I wanted to sort of see how they were coping with this. And then I have a young priest who loses his faith, and he's struggling with the question of evil. He's suddenly at a loggerhead, uh, and I wanted to show his journey as well, because here's a man who is trying to guide others, but he feels as if he's lost his way. There's a young American boy from Gloucester. He's a missionary. He's a teenager, and he's down there in Mexico doing his bit, trying to convert people to the Baptist church. And he's so earnest, and he's not very successful. People want to hang on to their religion, but he's so good-hearted, and he tries so hard, and he does make one person, he does make one convert and changes his life for the better. So it's fun to just explore these different people, what they're doing. Some of them head out of Mexico. They just give themselves exile. They go to Europe. They're out of there. And it's hard for them, too. Leaving home is not easy.
I can imagine under circumstances like that. And I know that you're mentioning some of the good side of humanity being explored there, but I know the book also explores some of the darker side. I know that the kind of all-consuming nature of revenge, or the desire for revenge. Yeah. There's a theme there, right? And kind of being entrapped by hell. So would you talk a little bit about how that shows up?
Sure. And even that revenge can just happen. It can start out very sort of innocently or on a small scale. So early in the book, Isabel has a major fight with her husband. And instead of trying to talk to each other and understand one another and patch things up, she gets this sort of sense of revenge, like, I'm not going to talk to him and he can just squirm. I don't care. And it really hurts her marriage, right? And she will regret this. She'll think about this many, many times, that she should have talked to him about what was troubling her. So that's revenge on a smaller scale, but it's the pettiness that many of us fall into.
Oh, I'd say everybody can relate to that.
Yeah.
Of like, okay, fine. Well, I'll just do that then. I know that's going to make you uncomfortable, but so yes, even that is relevant to daily life.
Right. And so it's the pettiness of it all. But then her mother-in-law really goes to town with this whole idea of revenge, because Isabel inherits everything, the whole fortune of the family. When the general, dies, he leaves everything to his daughter-in-law. And of course, the widow is furious about this and seeks revenge. And she just goes deep, deep into it and finds herself feeling trapped. There's even a time where she admits, I wish I hadn't gone this way. And she doesn't know how to get out of it. She's told so many lies. She doesn't know how to extricate herself. So it's a kind of a punishment, isn't it? That revenge can bring on.
It sounds like there's a Swedenborg quote, evil carries within it its own punishment.
Right.
And it sounds like there's some self-examination going on too, where characters are noticing the harm it's caused and beginning to regret. Which then I think leads right into a last theme that is in the book, which is forgiveness and our own limitations. And when there's all this going on, there's all this evil and all this, can we forgive? And when is it the limit of how much we can forgive?
And usually the people who are most forgiving are most loving, correct? I mean, it takes a lot to forgive, especially if it's something that concerns you deeply. So my protagonist finds she can forgive her nemesis, but this nemesis harmed somebody that Isabel really loved deeply. Oh. And that she can't forgive. She suddenly comes to sort of the limitation of her. She's just not there yet. She's not an angel. She can't quite forgive everything. And in her desperation, she just realizes she just has to pray. God, I can't forgive. Help me out with this. And I think of Holocaust victims, the survivors, how difficult it must have been for many of them, or most of them, to forgive what had been done to them. And so I have a line in the book, who but God can forgive all this? So I think when we humans find our limit, we need to turn it over to God and pray on it.
There's some things that beyond our capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of sort of forces you into that search for the higher power.
Yeah, because much as you might want to forgive, and you tell yourself, I will forgive, but if something in you is just not letting you forgive, ask for help. And that's where prayer comes in.
So many deep, important themes that touch the human heart, and I appreciate your effort to dig into these things and shed light on what's going on there. It's been a real joy talking to you through all this. Is there anything we haven't covered, or any thoughts you had that you'd want to tell our audience now about the book and the experience?
Well, I know one thing. My husband asked me, why are you so fascinated with physical hunger, which is what Isabel suffers while she's in her prison? And I realized later, after I'd written the book, physical hunger corresponds to spiritual hunger. And here's a young woman who is yearning to understand on a higher level how to cope with life. She's on a spiritual journey. So it suddenly made sense that, okay, that's why this is the way it is. And so often when I was writing the book, ideas would come to me, or characters. I wrote this book several times from different perspectives. It took me 9 years to write the definitive book, because I kept just checking what happens if he tells the story, if this character narrates. Do I go with first person, third person? So it's been a journey for me as well. And I finally just found, how to tell this story. So it's been a wonderful journey for me, and really digging into divine providence. I read that book over and over and over again.
You kind of did what Isabel did.
Yeah, exactly. And I was taking notes and just figuring, all right, how do I incorporate this idea? Which of my characters, how do I illustrate it through fiction? And that's my passion, illustrating spiritual ideas through fiction.
Well, I can tell it's a passion of yours. Thank you for sharing it here with all of us. And so everyone, the Swedenborg.com has the book. There will be a link in the description and on the page where you see this video. Take a look. Again, the book is Flight of the Trogon, book 2 of the Mexican Eden Trilogy. Sylvia, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me here.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.